Welcome, everyone. Really glad to see the great turnout. I'm super excited for this Corporate Connect information session. As many as you know, we have ICF International here. I'm not going to, when I have first-year MBA student Caitlin Woodall introduce our speaker here, but I had the privilege of working for Jim for several years in HR and recruiting. A lot of what I learned in taking care of people and true talent acquisition, talent management, and talent architecture was due to this person, Jim, who's here today. And he has a daughter, Jessica, that's a junior here, so she's in the back, as well as her Jim's wife, Lila, so thanks for coming. Really appreciate having you here. But obviously Jim is invested in William & Mary, not only because his daughter's here, but because he cares and understands the value of the William & Mary MBA, and you'll hear more about that today. So with that, I don't want to take too much of Jim's time and the opportunity for you to connect with him. So with that, something?
We're recording this session, so we're audio and they're on video for noise levels.
Yeah, we're recording this session. Yeah, we are recording this session. Just keep the potato chips noise to a minimum, the bag. Yeah. Do your best. And then keep that in mind when you're asking questions. So we will allow time at the end for Q&A. I know Jim wants it to be an interactive session, so feel free to ask questions throughout. But with that, as you know, we have our Student Ambassador Program. I want to introduce Caitlin Woodall, first-year MBA. We actually, ironically, Caitlin was at a company where it was a defense contractor, and we all worked together at one time. Caitlin, myself, and Jim were at the company at the same time in Chantilly, Virginia. So it's very unique to have her. So Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. My honor to introduce Jim Lawler, who's a senior VP at ICF International. He has more than 30 years of HR experience, especially in the international realm, and he's experienced especially in people-driven businesses. He served as the chief HR officer at Task, again, where we all worked together, where he had the smarts in order to hire at least both of us. And so he came at a time when Task was becoming its own entity. They developed new HR systems. He staffed the HR, recruited the leadership team, so really vast experience, and led a rollout of the compensation and benefits program. He has a BA in economics from University of Georgia and a coaching certificate from Georgetown. So please help me welcome Jim Lawler.
So it's always good to know your audience. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you are undergrads? I know that. How many of you are first-year MBA students? Okay. How many of you are second year? So how many of you already have your job lined up for when you graduate? Cool. So that's really why we're here. And I have a lot of sympathy for you. I got my job in December of my final year, and it was an enormous relief. And at the same time, it's a great mystery because you never quite know if you're making the right decision or not in terms of the company that you choose to join. So I'll talk a little bit about ICF and frankly give you a bit of a sales pitch, but it's a sales pitch that I believe in, but also talk about what some observations are around the choice of a company and what you might want to think about and what you might want to look for in terms of a company and a career, and then open it up for questions from there. And questions don't have to be about ICF. They can be about choice of company or thoughts about career. Happy to go kind of wherever you would like to go in terms of the conversation. But I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while. First off, as Mike indicated, I've known him for years, and I think the world of him. And any organization that Mike is associated with, to me, has got to be a great organization. The second aspect of looking forward to this is, as Mike indicated, my daughter Jessica is a junior here studying kinesiology, wants to be a physician's assistant, and I am biased, but I think any organization that she's a part of has got to be a great organization. Having said that, how this is going to work, I'm going to talk a bit about why I'm here, who we are, why work with ICF, and how to connect with us. And I mentioned Jessica being here. It would only be right to embarrass her a little bit if I can do that. So Apparently the animation won't work. Imagine a baby picture of Jess, because that's what I had set up to share with you. We won't get that, but we are going to talk a good bit about ICF. By way of background, to give you, if you can just hold it. By way of background, I started out working for a company called Nordson, which made industrial robotics. Then went to work for PepsiCo. I was with PepsiCo for about 14 years, lived in London, worked all over Europe and in Africa. Then went to work for a British company called Wrexham that made flexible electronic circuitry components. And then actually went to Giant Foods, supermarket chain, was head of HR there, became the head of HR for the parent company, which is Royal Ahold, which is a Dutch company headquartered in Amsterdam. So I spent 3.5 years commuting back and forth from Northern Virginia to Amsterdam, which I don't recommend to anybody. After that, started my own consultancy and did HR consulting and executive search for about 3 years. And I found that I missed being a part of a team. You know, it's great to be an individual consultant and have flexibility in your hours, go after the work you want to go after, solve complex problems for your clients. But to me, it wasn't the same as being a part of a leadership team that's trying to do something with a broader organization. So I joined Task at the time that it was spinning off from Northrop Grumman and really helped to stand up and build the company. And that was a blast. At the same time, any federal contractor that's dependent on federal budget funding has been undergoing tough times for the last 5 years. And so eventually, after 5 years of being at Task, I joined ICF. And I made a very deliberate move there. I knew ICF well. I knew a lot about the company. I knew how it had grown. I knew people that worked there. I had recruited people away from ICF to join me at Task. So I knew what I was getting into, and I've been there for about a year. And I think there's a lot that's unique about the company that sets us apart. And I think about your situation, and I think about how you've got to figure out what kind of work do I want to do? And in what kind of company do I want to work? Is it a large company, medium-sized company, smaller company? Do I want to do consulting work? Do I want to do audit work? Do I want to work in a consumer or retail environment? Do I want to work in technology? Million questions. And you don't necessarily have all the data in the world to make decisions on those questions. And you know you're only going to hear the positive side of the story from the company. And so, you know, there's a lot to take into account. And I talk to people all the time about jobs, and I'll always ask people in an interview, take me back to the time that you were a junior or a senior in high school. And think about that time, and everybody starts to crack up, because it's always a little bit embarrassing to look back. But I ask people, think about what you were going to study in college, and what your choice of college was, and what you thought you were going to do with your career at that time. And then tell me what happened. And 9 times out of 10, when people pursued their career, they ended up with some kind of course direction change. You know, they thought that they wanted to be in accounting, and then they found out they really don't want to be in accounting. They thought they wanted to work for a big company, and they found out they didn't want to be in a big company. It's course correction. It's learning as you gain more information, and it's very natural to do. Having said that, imagine the advantage for that 1 in 10 person who lands in the right place from the beginning. They don't lose the first 2 or 3 years. They don't have to course correct and make another shift. They get a payoff on that first move that they made, the first couple of years that they invested. And as I talk to people where it did work with the first move that they made, a part of it was the kind of work that people chose to do. So that's one consideration to take into account. Second piece of it is the people you work with. And are they people that you can spend 12 hours a day with? Because there'll be days where you spend 12 hours. The third piece is how much variety does the company have in the work that it does? Because if it's kind of a one-trick pony, a single offering, you'd better like that kind of work, because that's what you'll be doing. Alternatively, if they have a broad range of work and services, that gives you the potential to reinvent yourself several times over without changing companies. And then the last piece, is it a growing company? And is it a company that has the values that you want to be associated with? And if you can answer yes to all 4 of those questions, then I'd argue that you really have come to the right place. And so as I looked at ICF, those were some things that I took into account as I thought about where I wanted to go and spend, quite frankly, the last 5, 6 years of my career. Nobody wants to work forever, but you'd like the last 5 or 6 to be good years. So that's why I am where I am. And those are some of the considerations that I took into account. So that's why I'm here. I'll talk a little bit about who we are as a company and what kind of work we do, who we are as people, the kind of people that you might work with, more about the future of the company and the growth of the company and why that's an important factor to consider, talk about how to connect with us, and then open up for questions and answers after talking about jobs and career. As a company, we have about 5,500 employees. About 750 of those employees are in Europe and Asia, the remainder are in the US. And we are a really diverse company. We're about 53% women, 47% men. We are about 25% under the age of 30, about 25% over the age of 50, and then pretty evenly distributed in between. All kinds of ethnicity, racial backgrounds, gender preference, all that. You really get a wide mix of people. And the good news in that is it's a big tent. Anybody can feel comfortable there. In terms of what we do, that's a complicated story. The simplest way to describe it, and I'll start at a high level and then go into more detail. You can think of our work as falling under 4 pillars. And the first of those pillars is health and social programs. So we do a tremendous amount of work for NIH and CDC around health policy and around implementing health policy. We do a significant amount of work for the World Health Organization. We do one of the largest health surveys in the world. A significant amount of the survey work is done in Africa, which presents its own set of challenges in terms of gathering data. So some interesting kinds of challenges to deal with there. We work with healthcare providers and we work with healthcare payers like insurance companies on how to deal with healthcare reform, how to deal with engagement of their various constituencies, and how to effectively create opportunities for both doctors and patients to interact with the healthcare system. We do work around education reform. We do a significant amount of work with the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. We run most of the Head Start programs across the U.S. in terms of education. So we do a lot of work in early childhood education, childhood justice. We also do work around community development and dispensation of aid to underdeveloped communities. So there's a lot of work in the health and social programming area. We do an increasing amount of work in consumer and financial. And a lot of that work is commercially based work as opposed to being federal government agencies. We do a lot of website design, a lot of loyalty programs, a lot of data analytics for large companies, helping them to reach out and treat every individual customer of theirs as an individual, but then to aggregate the data and to extract the learnings and the opportunities from that for them. And that's a big and growing business. Our historical core to the business is around energy, environmental, and transportation. We were really at the forefront of identifying the reality of climate change and greenhouse gas and confirming that that is a reality. So we had folks that were testifying on Capitol Hill in the late 80s, talking about greenhouse gases. We built an integrated planning model that factors in all the different demand factors in the world energy markets and looks at the different sources of energy, whether it's electricity, gas, natural gas, now solar, all the other sources of energy, nuclear that could be tapped into. And we built a model that can predict, using any number of different planning scenarios, the interplay between prices of different energies over the course of time. And so we work with governments, we work with the big oil companies, we work with Greenpeace, any number of people that would have an interest in the interplay between climate and energy prices over the course of time. So a lot of big brain analytic work. We also do work in the transportation space. We consult with a lot of the major airlines around their economic choices. Do they rent or do they lease or buy airplanes? What model of airplane do they buy? What are the operational costs going to be over the life of that plane versus the other alternatives? We consult with airports on their interaction with the communities that they're a part of, with their revenue bases, and with their economic planning. So a really broad range of and deep range of work there. And then the final pillar is around cybersecurity and information technology security. We also do some work in disaster recovery and reputation management. So We've done a significant amount of work with the Hurricane Sandy and all of the rebuilding of those communities. We did a tremendous amount of work with Katrina and helping New Orleans to get back on its feet. So it's an incredibly broad range of work, and that's one of my points in terms of you could join a company like this and not get bored. There's a lot of different kinds of work to do with a lot of different customer bases. And when you look at our customer base, we still do about 47% of our work for the federal government. We do about 10% for state and local, particularly California is a big customer for us, particularly on the environmental side. And about 37% of our work is commercial. If you went back a couple of years, we would have done 15% commercial. So we've really built out our customer base on the commercial side. Quite frankly, as I mentioned, over the last 5 years, the federal government's budget issues have meant that they really can't increase their spending. And so there's only so much work to be gained as a federal contractor. And so we've adapted, we've moved into the commercial space and been very successful at it. It tends to be higher profit than the federal space. And quite frankly, there's quicker adoption of technology and of any new social trend. And so you can be closer to the leading edge working in the commercial space. And whatever capabilities you build on the commercial space, you can then take back to the federal agencies when they're ready to adopt, which is typically a few years later. So it's kind of a winning combination to do both. You see that we do about 6% of our work internationally. That number has gone down over the last couple of years, but not necessarily for the reasons you would think. When we convert these charts, we convert currency back from pound sterling, euros, et cetera, into dollars. The dollar has been so strong that on a unit basis, we're selling more services in Europe and Asia, but as it translates back to dollars, it's converting back as lesser dollars than the year before. So until the currency trends change, we'll see that number down at a lower level, but we expect that at some point when currency normalizes, we'll be 10, 11% international. We'll grow predominantly in Europe. You need a pretty established economic and social base to do a lot of high-end consulting. I mean, if you go to China, labor costs and India, labor costs are so low that consulting, being paid by the hour, frankly, is just not going to generate a lot of revenue. You want to have enough of a presence there to be able to move when the economy moves along. But for now, Europe is, from an international standpoint, really where we play. And predominantly in Europe, we do social policy and EU policy advisory services, ton of work for the EU, and we do a ton of strategic communications work. So I'll talk a bit more about that. But this gives you a sense for the fact that we have a diversified customer base. We're not dependent on any one customer, which is an important thing. It's just like your personal investment. You want a diversified portfolio. So that's who we are. That's a bit about what we do. Now comes the sales pitch part of this in terms of why I work at ICF. First off, we do work that makes a difference. I've given you a bit of a flavor for that already. But if you think about not only the hours per week you're going to spend at work, but the number of years you're going to spend working, it's going to be a whole lot easier to cope with if you believe in what you do. And so it matters more than people realize in terms of whether you believe in what your company does or not. I can't help but say it. I could not do audits for 1 million different companies all day long. I would start to wonder, what am I doing here? Is this really gratifying? So to me, there's got to be a little bit of a higher order to what you do, something that's meaningful. Frankly, when I look back on the time I spent at PepsiCo, I'm not sure that selling soda was all that meaningful. So if you can do work that has a higher kind of a meaning to it, in the long run, you can stick with it longer. Second piece is we have a lot of interesting, fun, really smart people at ICF that live whole lives. They're great in their career, and then you find that there's this entire other side to who they are and what they do, and they're cool people to spend time with. The third aspect is because of the fact that we're agile and we can move into new spaces and, for example, go into the commercial market or go into the international market, it gives you the opportunity to move with the company, to grow with the company, to have different experiences over the time. And because of that, you can stay and have a long career without having to jump from company to company. And there's These days, there's not a lot wrong with jumping from company to company, except for that you don't really know from the outside what it is until you get there. So there's always a degree of risk that comes with it. If you've built up a reputation, you've built relationships, and you have some form of kind of personal equity in a given company, if you can stay and leverage that and still do new work, that's kind of the best of both worlds. The next aspect is you want to be with a growing company, because quite frankly, if the company's not growing, they're going to have a hard time supporting your growth. They're going to have a hard time funding training. They're going to have a hard time making available promotional opportunities for you. You're frankly going to have to, if the company's static, not growing, or even worse, shrinking, you've got to wait for somebody to leave, retire, or pass away. And that's not a good vibe. So again, I think these are reasonably relevant criteria for anybody thinking about a company to join. But those are our strong points. That's sort of who we are and what we do and what we sell. And I mentioned here the fact that we have a soul. We have values that I think people can sign up for and feel good about being associated with. So a bit more about work that makes a difference. I've talked about some of this already, but we do incredibly interesting work. We do environmental policy work, energy efficiency. Talked about public health and safety. Talked about disaster recovery. I talked about Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. We also had a big part when the Ebola outbreak took place in Africa, helping to organize and then implement the response to Ebola in Africa. I mentioned the work we do in education, family housing, community development, and then on the commercial side, the digital engagement work that we do. And so it's an interesting blend of capabilities. And it gives us a package of capabilities where we can take the kind of work that we do for one customer, the kind of work we do for another customer, bundle that, and bring that work to a third customer and give them kind of a unique offering. So oftentimes we'll do strategic communications work and disaster recovery work at the same time. So we go to New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. We help to organize the dispensation of aid. We help to organize the rebuilding of that community. And we help with the communication strategy for the townships and the state that are working all of that. So that's what I mean by a bundled offering. If you then take it a little further and you look at some of the examples of what we do, in the upper left-hand corner here, you can see the survey work that we do in Africa, because you don't have the ability to survey digitally to get a meaningful component of the population. We go from village to village across Africa doing health survey work. And the largest survey globally that's conducted by the World Health Organization. So that's a piece of work that we do. We did work for Holocaust survivors, and they're a dying breed, they're a dying generation at this point. So meeting with them and understanding what their story was and helping to document that for states and countries in Central Europe. We did work in the wake of the Boston bombing to help with the response to that, both in the organization of the response to it and in the strategic communications on the part of the city of Boston after that occurred. We have a surprising number of biologists who do field surveys around the environment and the impact on salmon. We have people that literally specialize in nothing but salmon. We have people that specialize in trout. We have people that specialize in butterflies. And they're fully employed doing work that they love all the time. We did a piece of communications work for the World Humanitarian Summit, helping to make people aware of that and to get the right kind of participation there. We work with farmers on climate change. We do work with airports on their sustainability and their interaction with the communities where they abut and where there is occasionally friction, as you would expect. We do work on surveying the infrastructure around the transportation network in the U.S., looking at bridges and whether or not they are going to be structurally sound for the next 5 years or not, and then doing economic estimates of what it would take to bring them to structural sufficiency. We do work in Europe, which obviously this is very topical. We do work around preventing the spread of radicalization, and so particularly we find folks who had become radical and have now taken a different view on that. And we interview those folks and put that information out there via a variety of means, whether it be public television or through the web, driven by the EU as part of a campaign that we do for the EU. There's obviously a lot more to do there, but it's interesting work, and it's, again, work that people can feel good about. So that's a sense for some of the work that we do. On the commercial side, it's more about the individual. We do work for cities to describe their livability index and help them as they compete for bringing new employers and new citizens to their areas. We do work for the Department of Education on websites to help students do their science homework. We do work for the Stanley Cup on their brackets, sort of like March Madness. So we did a piece of work for them. We do a application on your phone for a pet food company if you want to track the health of your dog. So the diversity of what we do is kind of mind-boggling. And sort of the tie that binds it together is we're experts in the field. We combine that expertise with technology knowledge, with digital engagement expertise, and we're a great home for people who do all these kinds of work. The other side of this is the people that you work with, and the people are a trip. I was in a leadership conference last week. We had 50 people who are kind of on the edge of promotion to vice president, and so we bring them in from all over the world, and we spend 3-4 days getting to know them. They go through a series of leadership assessments. They get some executive coaching. We work with them on their development plans. We spend a day with the senior leaders talking about the strategy and the priorities for the company. And then they spend a day with our external constituents. They spend time with the board of directors. They spend time with investment analysts who follow the company. And they understand those constituencies and what their interests are. But you also get to know people. And so I met a guy who actually runs the kayaking program for the U.S. Olympics as a hobby, in addition to his regular job. A woman who's a Paralympic champion. A woman who had run 400-mile races. People who are accomplished in interesting in ways that have nothing to do with the work that they do. And there are a million other stories like that. You think you've got a good travel story, and you're sitting there at dinner, and somebody tells you that they walked across Spain, or they walked across these two countries. You kind of just stop them. So the other side of this is they're smart people, and about 40% of our folks have advanced degrees. And you can see the diversity of the degrees. You'll also see that second on the list is business and management. So folks that have MBA, Masters of Accountancy, those types of programs, almost 300 folks with those backgrounds. And so we're relevant for your world. And you also see that of our top 250 people, the average length of service is over 13 years. The number of people that leave in any given year is right at 11%, and that's very low in the consulting world. It's not uncommon to be at 20, 22%. So we are a good home for people. And we have a little over 40 William and Mary alums with us, and they have some interesting backgrounds. So first, you have Natalie Pinoy, who works in our organizational learning and research program. They support federal agencies predominantly, helping them with human capital issues. So she's done training design work for a number of different federal agencies, has been with us for about 1.5 years and loves what she's doing. And she came to us with, I think, less than 1 year of experience. So she went somewhere else, decided that wasn't the place, and then came to us. Then you take Colin Young. Colin has a master's in accountancy. He started with us in the accounting department in 2013 in our Fairfax office in Virginia. He then went to financial planning and analysis, so helping us with our budgeting and strategic planning. Did that for about 1 year. Now he's in London running a team of project controllers that oversee various consultancy projects that we do for the EU all over Europe. So a pretty good experience for him. Looking at folks who have been around a little longer, Eric Boyle joined us mid-career, had been with another company. He specializes in international aid. He's done a ton of work all over Southeast Asia, all over Africa, but is a huge William and Mary fan as a result of his experience here. And so he's now 20 years into his career, runs one of our lines of business, let's say 40, 50 million in revenue, which from a consulting standpoint is a meaningful chunk of business. And again, still harkens back to his time at William and Mary. And then you have Jen Welham, who runs our environmental health business. She started with us in 1990 straight out of school, straight out of William & Mary. And this is a big line of business. This is about 80 million in revenue. And she's grown over the course of time. She's worked across different areas of our business and then moved into the environmental health business in the last couple of years. And so she's been able to find sort of all the variety and all the growth and stimulation that she's needed through the course of being here. So different career patterns. Not everybody came here from the get-go, but lots of great experiences. And when you talk to people about the company, they just glow. You know, it's interesting to see how people react. So in terms of careers, this is just a sense for how serious we are about the company. So this is from like 1987. And just look at the two people in the middle, the kind of chubby-cheeked guy. That's not me, by the way. The chubby-cheeked tall guy, and then the guy in the center. So they started, the chubby-cheeked guy is on the right, and the guy in the center is on the left. So they started in the late 80s. John had come out of Cal Berkeley, and Sudhakar had come out of MIT. They started as associates, and now they run the company. So when we say that, you know, we'd like you to come join us and stay, we have proof of it. Beyond that, in terms of the frameworks that we apply, we do have a career path framework. That's not to say that every job has a clear-cut path to the top, but it is a way to think about what jobs are within reach for you, what are reasonable directions that you could take within the company. And so, not surprisingly, there's a technical career path, there's a management career path, and there's a consulting career path. At the end of the day, you could probably make, because we do pretty high-end work, you could probably, as a subject matter expert, make, say, $240 in base salary plus bonus as a high-end consultant. Not everybody will do that, but that's sort of the cap, realistically. If you want to go beyond that income level, you probably want to take the management route in order to be able to continue to escalate, because then you get P&L responsibilities and you're leading groups of people. There are headaches that come with that. There are challenges that come with that, but that's why you get the pay that you get. So that's a choice that lots of people have to navigate. Do they want to give up the work that they love, and do they want to take on that management challenge? But if you do, you can go a long way, just as John and Sudhakar did. So in addition to the career path framework, we have a career navigation center. It's an online intranet site that is a portal to a bunch of different resources. And so you can do a series of assessments to understand better your strengths and weaknesses. You can then match those strengths and weaknesses against jobs. You can identify areas where you need or have been told that you need development. And you can then map to what kinds of training programs or other development experiences that we have to address those needs. You can apply for a mentor and be matched with a mentor. So it's got a lot of different capabilities, and a bunch of folks, about a third of our people, log on and use that in some fashion. We also, about every 6 weeks, do what we call Career Matters, which are informal conversations with folks that have grown with the company. And so they talk about their careers and what their experiences have been and kind of how they got to wherever they are and whatever their advice is. And folks can take part in that live in person if they happen to be in the right location. We also film that and then make it available both real time and then on the web for people who are in a different time zone, or it's just more convenient to see it otherwise. So beyond that, we have the Learning Institute. There are about 300 courses that we have, predominantly online. We're probably 80% online training at this point, 20% instructor-led in the schools that you see listed there. So broad range of curriculum there. And we have people rate the training. So, you know, it's just like if you look at Yelp at a restaurant or something like that, you can decide, is this really relevant? Is it good? What did people like me say about this training? And that's a helpful kind of way to sort out what you want to devote your scarce time to. Educational assistance, we're pretty much normal in terms of educational assistance, in terms of the levels of benefit that we provide. Frankly, we've talked about doing more. We think there is something to it to have a little bit of skin in the game as the student, and so we've kept it at this level. But at any point in time, there'll be 300, 400 people in the educational assistance program. On an annual basis, we do talent reviews. And so we take a look at the whole organization, and we look at who's in what jobs, who do we think is a retention risk, do we need to do something about that, who's ready for a move, what kind of development needs do people have, if this job came open, who would be the successor, where do we have gaps, and what do we need to do about that. And then a couple of other steps. We have an emerging leaders program that we're piloting this year, which is for folks who are senior consultants right on the edge of moving into management. And so we work with those folks over the course of a year to give them shadowing opportunities with people in other roles, give them exposure to senior leadership, give them some project work to do across the company so that they can kind of exercise their leadership skills and demonstrate their leadership skills. We have a similar program for folks who are right at the cusp of promotion to VP, and that's the Accelerated Leadership Program. And that was the program I was mentioning that we were at last week. So good opportunity to understand the company, to get some visibility across the company, to build some relationships, and for senior management to get to know you, which just increases the chances of you ending up in the right place in terms of your career. And then a whole battery of assessments and 360 feedback tools that help people to be self-aware and to know where their own development needs so that they can then plug that into their development plan. So that's kind of a quick sampling of the resources that we make available to people. So that's the career side of things in terms of support. The next piece is really being a part of a company that's growing, that's global, and that has values that you can align with. And you can see our mission statement there. It doesn't say anything about making money or shareholder value. If we do what we do well and we do it efficiently, we'll make money. And we do like to make money. So, I don't want to mislead anybody. We're not a charity, but we do great work. And by doing great work, it lets us attract people and for them to give their best in what they do because they get up in the morning feeling good about what they do. And so that's a pretty good start to being able to make money. Our strategy for growth has 5 components. The first aspect of it is to expand our commercial business. I talked about the fact that we've gone from 12 to 20 to 37% commercial. We'd be comfortable getting to about 50% commercial. If it went further than that, that would be fine. But we think that balanced portfolio is a nice place to be. So we'll continue to build out the commercial business. We'll do not only advisory work, and oftentimes we'll get to the beginning of work with a client through advisory work. They've got a huge policy question that they need help with. And then we'll extend our services and help them with the implementation, whether it's a policy issue or an IT solution or a digital engagement solution. We'll back it up. And the strength in that is that we can say, you can trust us with the advice we give you because we'll be here to help you implement this if you want us to. And so it's sort of walking the talk and backing up what you say you'll do. The other aspect is it gives you long-term engagement with that client and then the probability of more continued work down the road. So that is what's in it for us. The third aspect is to make engagement and technology integral to our business. So we bought a company called Olson last year, which does website design, loyalty programs, and they are state-of-the-art at that. And so a lot of work for airlines, hotels, retailers. But you can take all of that capability and you can go to the VA, and the VA wants, the Veterans Administration wants to know, how do I engage with the hundreds of thousands of veterans across the U.S. about their health in a way that's private and individualized for them? How do I engage with all the doctors within the VA system across the U.S.? The technologies that we use with Target or with Amtrak or Hilton Hotels can help the VA with their problem as well. Department of Education has similar questions. How do they engage with school administrators all over the country? How do they engage with parents? We can help them do that. And so there's a huge opportunity to help all of those agencies be more efficient. And in an era of shrinking budgets, that's important for them, but also more effective because they can connect with people in the way that they want to connect these days. The next aspect is to grow our business geographically. I mentioned the fact that the predominant work that we do in Europe is strategic communications and European policy advisory services. That means that we still don't do a lot of IT work there. We don't do a lot of digital engagement work there, on and on and on. And so there's a huge opportunity to take our existing footprint and then build that out. And we'll do some of that through hiring and winning work. We'll do some of that by acquiring companies and then adding them to our portfolio. And to that point, strategic acquisitions will always be a part of our growth strategy. We've made 18 acquisitions since we went public in 2006. And we've grown from 200 million in revenue 9 years ago to 1.2 billion in revenue now. So that's a pretty amazing ride. So this will show you a little more recently. Curve's flattened out a little bit, but you can see our revenue growth running 10% compounded aggregate growth per year over the last 5 years. And you can see earnings per share. So take our profit divided by our number of shares, and you can see that running 10%. So good numbers, healthy growth, and remember that half of this business is federal, which is really difficult to grow in and has been really difficult to grow in over the last 5 years. So that's what the financial side of things looks like, and you've got to be able to do that to attract investment. You've got to have investment to be able to continue to fuel your growth, and you've got to be able to grow to provide people with growth opportunities. It all kind of fits together. So as we've grown, we've expanded our footprint. You can see our locations. The real centers of gravity for the company are Fairfax, Virginia, Minneapolis, Atlanta, San Francisco and Sacramento, and then it tends to be smaller offices beyond that on the U.S. side. And then on the European side, it's London and Brussels. And the other offices tend to be considerably smaller. But that's really where the larger blocks of folks are. So the last piece of this is the point about values and you know, what's the personality of the company that you join? And that is sort of the final calling card. We try to walk the talk in terms of advising people on things like sustainability and the environment and being energy efficient. So we were the first carbon neutral consulting firm in 2006. We have green teams in over 20 of our offices that help with recycling and with sustainable practices within each office. We have a huge amount of people involved with volunteerism. And so we do a campaign every year where people elect the 3 charities that they want the company to support. And based on the votes, that's whoever we put our money to. And then in addition to the money that we donate, people get involved, and we run various campaigns over the course of the year to get people not only contributing, but having some fun. So end of the year, we'll do a huge charity event where people will donate. It'll be bottles of wine, tickets to Wizards games, weekends at a timeshare that somebody owns, but there'll be 50 items in this charity, and you can do it both online and in person, and people start bidding up the prices on this stuff to ridiculous levels because they want to win whatever it is, and the money all goes to the chosen charity. So that's just a feeling for what it's like and sort of why I say that we have a soul. It's a better place to be than some sort of sterile, typical corporate generic environment. So to connect with us, we don't do a lot of campus visit type recruiting, because if you think about all the different kinds of work that we do, you can't really come in and say, we want this profile of candidate. You know, our hiring managers are going to hire you as an individual, not as part of a class. You know, it's not a crop. We don't need 15 of you and know that 7 are going to drop out over time. That's not how we do it. And so we invite you to go online and start to search based on the kinds of work that you would feel interesting, and there's some cues in terms of levels of jobs. You know, look at the analyst, the associate, and the manager type jobs and see what you see there. And apply online, and we'll invite you up, spend time with you, get you to meet the people that you need to meet. And if you're hired because of you as an individual. You know, we're not in this for mass numbers. It's not to say that we won't make plenty of hires. We hired 1,500 people last year. Not all college graduates by any means, or recent grads. But we do have needs. We grow. And the trick is being connected with a manager who says, I want you. So that's the reason that we don't do as much on campus. Because whoever met you on campus, probably, given our diversity, wouldn't be the person hiring you. So let's take one step out of the process in our case. So some thoughts on jobs and careers, and then I want to open it up for questions. The first is obviously pointed up and talking about a bit already, and that is, money matters, but so does how you feel about what you do. And so you're going to spend a lot of time and potentially a lot of years working. If you can feel good about what you do, if you can wake up in the middle of the night and actually think about work and have a good idea, as opposed to stressing about it, that's where you want to be. The second piece is you don't absolutely positively have to get it right in terms of your first job out of the MBA program or out of undergrad. But if you can, it saves you a couple of years. And so, my hope is that whatever will be right for you, you can get that right. And so it is worth paying a lot of attention to and thinking about all the factors. The third piece is training is great, but responsibility is way better. And I look at folks that go into some of the big companies and they're drawn to the training. Great, but in a year and a half, if you don't want to be there and somebody's asking you about your most significant contributions to the company, why is that company different because you were there, you got to be able to answer that question. And so to me, the real question is, are you going to get real responsibility in your job? If you are, that at the end of the day trumps everything else, because that gives you a chance to put points on the board and to show what you can do. And then finally, you got to decide, do you want to be an individual or do you want to be a number? And I think there are large companies that can treat you like an individual. There are small companies that can treat you like a number. So it's not as simple as large and small company. But look for the cues in terms of how long have people been there? How do people appear when they talk about the company? How interested are they in you? What's the assurance that your manager is really going to invest in you and spend time with you and give you the coaching and the feedback that you need? That's a gut level call. But, I'd urge you, don't be a number. Life's too short. So with that, I'll open it up, see what kinds of questions you guys have.
Full disclosure on animation. When you sent us the presentation, we had to convert it for the recording. So we saved Jessica's baby picture. So
I'm so bummed.
But we are going to email it out to everybody. I'm kidding. But one final note, as you can see the key takeaways here, obviously keep those in mind from a career standpoint. Funny story, when I first interviewed with Jim about 4 years ago, I'd always wanted to get into higher ed and get into this world. And I sat with him for an HR job, and I told him about and I normally wouldn't tell someone where I want to go, and it wasn't necessarily the job that I'm interviewing for, but I just did. And he told me at the time, I remember he said, well, I think you'll be better if you come here now and do this job now for a few years if you want to get where you want to go. And it was a great point. I jumped in, and actually we lost a major contract right when I got there, and I spent about 2 years redeploying people that lost their jobs into new opportunities. So if you think about what that experience did for me in terms of what I have to do with all of you and what I love to do with all of you, reconnecting you to opportunities, I wouldn't be as efficient or good at it without that experience. So I appreciate that, Jim. So what I will tell you is every experience that you take, you have a goal in mind of where you want to go, but think about every experience that you need to help you get there. I think that's part of your story, so keep that in mind. So on behalf of all of us, Jim, William Mary, and the Mason School of Business, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day for being here. We have a little gift for you from the Powers. And Caitlin, we'll get to you, student ambassador. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Round of applause. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. All right, that completes our session. Thanks, everybody.